that the people ratified when it passed it on referendum, that they got an X percentage of 8% for as long as the casino was in office.
Isn't there something else that's just for 20 years? I'm sure they'll get a percentage of something from now on, but there was also something that they got every month from that casino, and it's only for 20 years.
Turn it on.
I don't remember that.
Well, the guy at the wastewater treatment plant was concerned about that. He brought that.
But that loan was guaranteed by a private individual.
Never knew.
Yeah. I thought it went, the education was part of it. A certain percentage of 1% was also given towards agricultural fields. And then the town received, because of the increase in traffic flow, received some dollars. And I tried to get them to send some of that over to this side. They did not hear anything about it.
No.
They have like a $10 million budget. It's ridiculous.
Who?
Oxford.
Really? Well, they have the new municipal complex.
Right down office.
After looking
They
at
have
the
town
town
office.
I don't know what they're doing, but yeah, they have a huge budget.
Well, your neighbor is involved in that. Don't tell him what it could be.
I know our neighbors is
Yeah.
Premature, but they do have. Nancy's coming down, right?
Is Nancy coming down? She closes all day.
They said we could need one of this meeting, one of something this morning.
All your
You
crews,
did get votes on?
people don't, I don't know,
Though Mr. Ford and Mr. Nance did let me know ahead of time that they would not be available for this meeting, as did Councilor Downing.
okay, I guess we're all here. This open seats also, correct?
We did.
Or are they being filled?
Yep.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, is it the number 4, is this something we're doing now?
If so, I think it's similar to something that we had last year, because we do not have a quorum for the budget committee, so we'll push it off until the March 5th meeting. So what we will have is we'll have Mr. Nance and Mr. Ford will be back. I'd also like to introduce Mary Allen, correct? Mary Allen has submitted a application to the budget committee that's on your agenda for your March 2nd meeting. So I've invited her here tonight, and there is another applicant that I've invited as well who's applied for the budget committee too. So you will meet them more formally at the next council meeting, and then we will hopefully be up to the actual full budget roster as well. So we can skip that one if you want me to jump into kind of the presentation of the agenda. We are going to be a little late tonight, so we'll skip the formalities for the budget committee. So what we're looking at tonight, I'll cover more of the general overview, more of the administration side of the budget proposal. And I've actually scheduled out the next couple of council meetings. We have one on March 5th, and then the final one on March 19th, which we've kind of broken out to have the rest of the departments. So what I would be looking at is, and if we can either move faster or slower, that is fine by me. But we'd be looking to do legal services, municipal complex, town clerk, administration, safety compliance officer, utilities, code, and library today. And for our March 5th meeting, we can do recreation, social services, assessor, auditor, contingency, debt, pensions, and animal control, which would leave for our 19th meeting, that is left, fire, police, public works, and transfer. Knowing I think those may have a little bit more of the longer conversations as well. And in that final meeting on the 19th, we do have to, what we traditionally do is sit down and we'll go back over all of the individual departments. We'll talk about them all the way through. At the end of the 19th meeting, we'll go line by line for the final number that's agreed upon by the group. Budget committee would vote, and council will take their separate votes for recording those final votes that would be recognized on the warrants when we put it in front of the voters. After that, we would be scheduling the public hearing. So there will be the final public hearing for the budget proposal on April 6th. And then we would be putting it on the June ballot from then on out if there's no changes. So the top of in your books, we've tried to provide a little bit more historical information as well. Inside the front cover on the revenue reports, we have our year-to-date numbers, which is 66% year-to-date, I believe. And then there's a larger one. So they'll say revenue reports on the front. There'll be one packet that has the brown lines in you picked yours up ahead of time. And this was after talking to you guys got yours early. We were putting these together this week. After catching up with Mr. Nance and Mr. Ford, wanted a little bit more detailed on the historics, so we can kind of see our trends, revenue, and expenses, not just by department. So what Lisa was able to pull together was all the way back to 2015. We have revenues by line item, as well as 2 pages in, we have our expenses by line item, so it's not just the department totals. You can actually see a full breakdown and the percentage changes of what it is we've been kind of trending historically for expenses and revenues. And those are the numbers that we've kind of been using to gauge, more so on the revenue side. Expenses are really need-based, but revenue side, especially with excise and some other creeping revenues that are traditionally over what we traditionally budget, we're trying to be a little bit more accurate on what it is we're budgeting. Jumping into it, I didn't do nearly as much. I did a lot of the research last year to look at our historic trends, really what we've been doing in overall expenses, and kind of focused again on really, I think what we're waiting for is that reset when we do our new evaluation. We have, after this budget, we'll be close to about 100,000 in funds set aside to do the town reevaluation. On page 3 of the cover, when you can see the historic valuation rate adjustments and how that is actually impacted, as well as the mill rate adjustments, all coincide dramatically with an actual reval of the town assets of all of our properties, and doing a more intensive reval, which involves us sending our assessor out to revalue all of the properties in town. Some towns do rolling revaluations, where we'll do a quarter of their town kind of every year. So what we've been budgeting for the past half a dozen years or more has been about $10,000–15,000 a year towards this reval. And in our CIP that we are covering will be within striking distance of pulling the trigger on that reval within about a year. Any questions so far? Andrea,
Yes.
there you are. Can I introduce you as well?
Sure.
Andrea is another applicant we've had for the budget committee. Do you have a physical book?
I don't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So her application will be in front of the council in March as well. So the biggest changes in this presentation from last year, if you remember, we kind of made some consolidations and we did a lot more effort was put into reallocating expenses towards the end users when it comes to internet, utilities. We spent more time last year breaking those out to the end departments. And what we were anticipating was being in the new building, it would be easier, would have separate, much more separate heating bills for different departments. It'd be easier to break up. So if you're looking at our historics, especially for the year-to-date finances, it's going to look a little skewed because last year's budget, this current year's budget that we're working on right now was built with the presumption that we would have relocated to the 22 Pleasant Street, would have been more efficient, and some of our offices would have been dramatically smaller. We didn't, so really the only things that you can really notice within those is the utility budgets within our departments are going to be a little off, especially for people on this floor who are anticipating much smaller square footage offices and a more efficient building. In general, we're not necessarily concerned with it because fire, public works as well are actually trending lower on the overall because, again, all of us are here kind of consuming the same heat. So at the end, it's going to be a wash. But the square footage we used to calculate the allocated expenses in this year's budget are off. The overall, what we tried to do was present something that's pretty lean, and we've come, I think, pretty close. If you want to jump to the bottom line, net to be raised, increase is only 56,000 above what was raised last year by taxation. There are also some numbers that I can't provide yet. I'm working on, and this really has to do more so with the mill rate and what that impact is going to be. Last year I had the mill rate calculation sheet a little bit, actually from day one. I really like to kind of work from that picture backwards. This year with the changes to Homestead, we're still waiting on the final calculation. There are going to be some notable impacts to the homesteads. For the most part, but we are expecting the final homestead revals that we do process. We did about 649, 650 last year. So with homestead reimbursements, previous years, $20,000 of your home would be essentially tax exempt, and then the state would give us 62.5% of that value to the town as an offset. So what we're expecting this year is actually a big benefit. The homestead exemption is going up to $30,000, which is better for the homeowner. So the first $30,000 of their home is going to be tax exempt. And what the state is actually going to reimburse to the town is 75% of that exempted value. I think we did rough math on it, and I'm anticipating about $55 per home that has a homestead exemption on it. Would see a $55 increase per home and about $600 and maybe $700 per home. That we don't have yet. We're waiting on the newer mill rate calculation sheet to be released, as well as the state, the school numbers. The school is, again, we've heard looking to go up 7% on salaries. So we're kind of building this with that understanding that we want to, I don't want to say keep it lean, but we're not jumping into a lot of the CIP and the asset stuff, again, because we have so much up in the air when it comes to this building and what we may be working on in the future for the Municipal Complex Planning Committee and what their direction is. To step back and take a longer look at what it is we're doing, there's not as much, especially in the facilities or development, in the CIP accounts, not just the operating accounts, I think that I would like, but because we're just starting the process, the council approved the Municipal Complex Planning Committee to kind of take a fresh look at what it is we have for operations and what it looks like we need. I'm using our current debt service payoff for the renovations on this building. We have 2 years left. The $800,000 that we did for this building was 18 years ago. We have about 2 years left. So that would be 40,000 dropping off from our debt service every year that we could use towards borrowing for a new municipal complex. As well as what we have in this budget for debt service still includes the payments on 22 Pleasant Street. If we can sell 22 Pleasant Street, and in 2 years when we drop off the debt service for the repairs on this that we have, that'll give us $80,000 in operating budget that would be potentially opened up for either a new complex or a reduction in expenses. I think it'd be more logical, kind of long-term for us to kind of plan to use some of that freed up debt service capital within 2 years to have a plan for a new municipal complex or development, but it's the will of the council and that committee when it comes to kind of planning how big and what it may be. Construction prices are scary right now, but that's why I'm thinking a 2-year horizon for having an actual plan for a new complex, work on the financing, and knowing that we will in potentially 2 years have $80,000 less in debt service payments within our budget would give us a little bit more wiggle room. Any questions? Yes.
Just clarifying, on your letter to the council and the budget committee at the very end, the second paragraph from the end, it says, finally, we are expecting a $77 billion increase in the state share of K-12 education. Is that billion or million?
It was, and it was actually for the state approach. So what I'm also curious through the budget for the school is what that impact is going to be. I mean, in working with Mr. Healy as well, we're hopeful that the state kicking in more money for K-12 education, knowing that the school is budgeting a notable increase in their budget for this year. Once they iron out what they're going to get from the state, hopefully it'll be closer to a wash. I think from the school's point of view and from the town's point of view, with homestead exemptions going up from what we get from them, as well as municipal revenue sharing, which is, as long as they hold what they've anticipated last year, another 0.5% of revenue sharing will come back to us as the municipality. So, I don't want to be too hopeful that the state's going to be kicking in more of our tax money back towards municipal and RSU spending, but that is the trend that we've had in the past year or so. We went up 1%, or at least 0.5% last year. 0.5% in revenue sharing. We're still down from where we were in the 90s. We used to be closer to 5% revenue sharing. Now we're pushing like 3% revenue sharing. And this is the sales tax and our portion of it that comes back to our municipality based on population valuation. And it was a bigger push that a large group of municipalities through MMA as well kind of lobbied for under the new administration, is to put that tax money that has traditionally gone back to municipalities from what the state takes through sales tax and income tax towards municipal spending. Because prior, we had counted on that revenue, and then it never seemed to come back from the legislature as much as it had before. Any questions so far? So if we want to, we'll get into some of the little changes when we get there. So all in all, just to try and get a bigger picture, the one notable thing that is going to skew the numbers that we're looking at this year, when 22 Pleasant Street was purchased. It was purchased with funds for renovations and relocation for us. So we have those funds sitting in the bank, $344-ish thousand sitting in the bank. Since it's part of the USDA loan, since we're not moving to 22 Pleasant Street, we have to pay those funds back. We can't use them for anything else. We're gonna use it as a debt service pay down on the whole $700,000 loan that we took out 2 years ago. We've not been able to do that yet because we can't make a debt service pay down unless it's part of the budget, so we need voter approval to be able to make that pay down. So if you just glance kind of quickly on that summary page for the debt service tab, it shows that we are up a net change of $411,000 more in debt service than the previous year. That is because we have a $400,000 one-time pay down on the debt from the money that we've already borrowed. That throws that, but that number also comes back in on the revenue side to offset it, because we're pulling money out of our savings account right now, using it to pay down that debt. So if you're looking at, on the bottom line, where you're kind of looking at total expenditures, it looks like we're $500,000 more in total expenditures. $400,000 of that $500,000 is that one-time debt service for money on hand. So it's really not an operational expense going up. All in all, we're about $100,000 in operations proposed currently over what we had in the previous year. That number, and that's why it makes it a little harder to kind of do those calculations, knowing that we have a one-time debt service payout that is much larger than any increase that we normally see in our operational budget. Does that make sense?
You also mentioned in your summary letter about impact on staffing right now. You mentioned that you're currently advertising for 4 vacant positions. Is that, I assume, with various town departments? And would that, until those positions are hired, would that have a possible potential impact on the bottom line of those budgets?
For this current fiscal year, yes. So we've had openings for the most part right along. We had some staffing turnover. As you know, last year we had increased to, we added the 6th man for the police department, and we got that person hired on and soon lost another officer up there as well. So we've been down almost one person for about 7 years or 7 months in the PD of this current budget. So that is adding for more of the savings. On their side, because of the 24-hour coverage, it's chewing it up more of the overtime than we'd anticipated. But again, it's about a wash. That was really the justification we used last year for adding the 6th man, was the reduction in overtime. So the dollar amounts there isn't going to hurt that budget. Clerk's budget, water, yes. We are currently seeing salary savings of that. And the upside from that is the revenue we don't spend, or the expenses that we don't have in this current year will essentially add more to the general fund by the end of the year, which allows us to keep kind of applying the available fund balance. The auditor tells us how much in excess we have in our bank account than we need for operations. And that's what we use to carry it forward. We did $185,000 last year, applied from fund balance to the budget. This year we're anticipating 190, so we're in the same ballpark. It could be a little bit more because we have those extra savings. What we also have this year, which we haven't counted, is we sold 4 foreclosed properties. I can't remember the total.
I think it was about $85,000 in revenue that we hadn't budgeted for, because obviously we didn't know what they were going to sell for. So that will, at the end of this fiscal year, also come back into that general fund and will help fund balance going forward. So this using of $190,000 against this proposed budget, we're not expecting that to do any damage to our fund balance.
We don't normally budget for revenue from foreclosed property sales. It's something we don't want to do. This year, thankfully, we have 0 foreclosures going forward. Everybody's paid their taxes and we're not taking any home. So we won't see that revenue, but thankfully everyone's able to kind of keep up with their thing.
So as far as the vacancies go, you're hoping to fill these vacancies within the next month or 2, or?
We've been interviewing right along within the PD. We have more interviews for clerks. And we have a standing opening as a transfer station manager. We have that currently filled by someone. It's fantastic to have them, but they can't do it forever for us. But they're helping out, and it's nice to have them. I'm not dragging my feet per se, but it's nice to have them.
You said the clerk's job or something?
We have a deputy clerk,
A
yes.
deputy clerk, okay.
You want to jump in first department, or do you guys want to go over the revenue side first? And go in order. The second colored page would be your estimated revenues. We haven't made any real changes in the revenues. We're coming closer, I believe, on excise is where we were always coming out pleasantly surprised.
The only real big increase you see there is the one that says from reserve accounts, but we already covered that. That is that money that's sitting there waiting to pay down the rural development loan.
And below that, from reserve account on page 2 of the revenues, if you look at the big red numbers, the notable ones would be the Betty reimbursements, the 18,500, and then below that is the homestead reimbursements of 165,347. We don't budget for those. Those kind of come in on the mill rate calculation sheet after. So we can't consider those as revenues, but you can kind of see what we've generally trended for homestead reimbursements. For 16, 17, 17, 18, we've gone from 113,000 up towards 165,000 in the current budgeted year for homestead reimbursements. Actually, the last actual year that we have completed was 18 and 19. We were 185,000. Again, with those changes, I'm hopeful that we will see much more reimbursement from the state directly. And the benefit too is that it's not coming from our taxpayers either. They're going to see more savings this year on their bill. But again, we can't budget that as revenue because when we get to our mill rate calculation sheet on the end, that's where that becomes added in.
Yeah, the marijuana fee is at the top of the page on page 2, but we only went with the 3,500 that we're sure of from the 2 businesses that have already.
And so we did, based on the approval of marijuana businesses, we've only included the 3,500 for licensing fees from the 2 approved retail operations. That doesn't include any assets or any valuation increases that those businesses do bring us. So it's the kind of the most conservative approach to, at least we know we're going to get their annual licensing fees as long as they stay in business.
We really weren't expecting much more from that room.
Yeah. Does that includes both sides of that, correct? That includes the
Yes, for the licensing, yes.
the licensing and the sale to a medical card? There'll be 2 different facilities within the same premise.
Yes, so, and this would only include those licensing fees for the business that they pay their annual fee. So the state, and I'm still not positive offhand, but I don't believe we're gonna see any sales tax break on it. What we may potentially see is an increase in revenue sharing based on that if the sales, and there's dramatic sales tax increase, but I believe that the legislature has actually segregated those sales tax funds from what they calculate the rest of our revenue sharing funds on. That was kind of the big downside to the way they proposed it, is the municipalities didn't get the direct sales tax benefit. Unless they gave us the opportunity to, I think Auburn was considering it. I don't know if they are doing the 1% local sales tax, which we haven't considered or really discussed, but that would be all retail businesses in town. They're giving us the opportunity to levy our own municipal sales tax, but I don't think it's an incredibly popular idea.
So we can't just say, okay, we're gonna sell marijuana or whatever, just marijuana, you can't put a special town tax on that.
I can't remember the numbers, the Auburn's approach when they're entertaining their 1% local sales tax, I mean, they're anticipating is on all retail sales. So, I mean, they're looking at millions of dollars a year in 1% sales tax. We can't earmark it to a specific industry.
Yeah, I have one real basic
Yep.
question. The homestead reimbursement, the $165,347,000, we received that this year? That's what the homeowner for Mechanic Falls is?
That's what we projected we were going to be receiving back from the state this year.
This year? On this
Current,
budget that we're in right now?
this budget that we're in right now. I can tell you that we have received so far, on the homestead, we've got $132,026. The second payment, the state does these in 2 payments. They generally give us like 75% up front, and then they give us the second payment. We won't see it until like August. So we might do a little bit better on this number than what we had projected as 165,347. I'm not quite sure. I think we were concerned about the reimbursement rate at the time. But I'm projecting that we're supposed to be collecting another $33,300 from the state in this current year budget.
We'll move forward. First one is boards and council. The only real changes to this is we have bumped up training and travel. Based on our current usage, we're definitely spending a lot more between all of the boards on training and travel, and then the legal bill was moved down into the board. So what that actually provides specific funding for council and planning board, legal fees, and we have legal fees at other places where before we'd have $4,000 for the entire general government. And I think it was a little bit more effective this way. The planning board, again, has their ability to call in legal to work on planning board stuff. I know we're talking about more code review, policy, or gives them a little bit more autonomy to do that, and council as well to move some of the legal bill in their budget. Code enforcement has some of their legal budget, and then administration has a legal budget as well.
Any thought of raising the stipends that the board members on the planning board would get? At this point in time would be the time to bring this up.
Yes, it would. Yep.
Seeing that our board members are meeting now 12 months out of the year, and our planning board members only get $10 per meeting, I'm thinking that maybe that should be brought up to 25 for all. I don't know when the last time these were adjusted, but it would make sense that if someone's giving up their time to the town, that they would be able to do that. Wouldn't be bad for our councilors to get an increase.
Well, I remember a meeting that we had here, and a certain constituent that lives on Bucknam Avenue, on Bucknam Road, said that we should get paid more money. One of our favorite people.
So looking historically kind of back just at the boards and council salary line, Fiscal year 15-16, it was at 2950. 18-19, we're up a couple hundred. We're now at 3364. I don't have more detail at hand on, whether that was council or, do you remember, when they would have been adjusted last?
Okay, I can tell you that I've been here for 25 years, and the council stipends have not changed during that time, nor has the planning board stipends
Just because
changed
of
at
how
all.
many meetings they have.
Yes, the planning board, of course, is paid per meeting, so that goes up and down depending upon how many meetings they might have, but the actual individual stipend dollar amounts have always been $10 for a planning board member and $12 for the chair. And the council earns their stipends on a quarterly basis. And they're $150 for the chair quarterly and $125 for a council member quarterly.
Is there a way to review comparable communities as far as budget goes, just to see what they are paying for stipends, just so we can be...
I don't think $25 for planning board or someone that gets paid by the meeting is
Well, I mean, if we've been $25 per meeting is what I,
yes, I understand. So that would be like $300 a year, and you
Yeah.
presently get, if you met 12 times, you get 120.
yes. Yeah.
It should be easy enough. So we can go out and do a comparable and have those for the next budget meeting, if you guys would want to see that first.
Yeah.
Okay. Put that on our punch list. Donations stayed the same, and the subscriptions have stayed the same in that. Are there any other questions on that one? I'm gonna check that.
Lisa?
Yes.
And under boards and council, what was the difference from the $3,000 difference in the minor CIP at the end, at the bottom of that line? Last year versus this year?
I'm trying to think what we had in there.
Website.
Website
Website, and there was, town signs.
and town signs were in that line item last year, and we took those out.
The town signs came up a couple of times because the bid that we got for the amount of signs we budgeted was dramatically higher than what we had available. So the council was putting some forward, the development commission was putting some forward.
We've been working on that for 5 years. And it's
What's that?
the signs for when you come into the gym. 5 years.
That's the result.
Begging the development community to pay some money.
I don't know why that was recording. Julie, you had yours.
If I can make the next council, next meeting, maybe I'll have to do it.
Do you guys have a development commission meeting? Oh no, we had our meeting at the same time.
Yes, next month.
Where is the sign, Jay? I mean, where are we now on buying the sign? It's been 4 years in the making of this thing.
We can re-bid it out. We were off by about half. It was kind of set for originally 6 signs. If we could, for that price, kind of pull off maybe 3, even with our guys setting them, which is where we opted not to, and we ended up having to utilize some of those extra funds in the first year by not expending it, so we had extra funds left over to pay for some of the extra expenses from the fire.
I don't remember what the saying was, open for business or something?
I can pull it up, I have the whole packet, but, I didn't incorporate it, knowing everything else we have going on the municipal complex this year. I didn't put it back in. But we can if you are interested. Can you jump to municipal complex? So this one, if we go further back in the historics, we're looking at about 85.5 in this year's municipal complex budget, which is mostly utilities and contracted services. The last full fiscal year that we ran the municipal complex was 18-19, and the actual expenditures were 91.75.
What line is that you're looking at?
On the historics?
Yes.
So the one with the brown lines going up and down, page number, the first page of the expense summary under account 10 municipal complex. We are running the pellet boiler currently, and pretty optimistic about that saving on our heating bill. Oil prices haven't been painful lately. But we are going to burn out the rest of those pellets. There's about 3/4 of the silo out there. We had to do a little bit of repair. There was a couple circulator pumps that we needed to have swapped out that were seized in order to get the pump, in order to get the pellet essentially back integrated into the rest of the furnace system. But it is running, and we actually have now full control over the building. We have a facilities computer system that controls our entire heating system through a Java module online that we can now control, and it's running much more efficiently, I think. And now the pellet boiler's on there, I think we're going to do much better on our heating bill this year than we had last year.
Who figured all this out,
Figure all that out.
how this thing works, and making it better?
To be honest, we had a cold morning. We pulled in Nason, our furnace guys, to look at it, and it was actually standing there working with him when he mentioned that we had this computer system. And I really think the computer system and the control module was just not, it kind of wasn't portrayed to me as something that we had that I needed to keep an eye on, because we were anticipated being out before winter. So essentially, people had kind of washed their hands of the pellet system because of the way it worked, some of the inefficiencies and some of the trouble that I think they were having with it. I think we have it up and running a little bit more efficiently, and having both Jones and Associates and Nason working, because neither of them take responsibility for the pellet boiler. Neither of them essentially sold it to the town, but they both work around it enough. Again, Nason turned me on to how to get into the system. I was able to get my way into it and figure it out. But the company, IBS Controls, who installed the system, I mean, it's older Java-based software, and they don't really return tickets. They don't help when we put in concerns or trouble we were having, but we were able to make it work.
So it was a programming issue and you fixed it.
Yeah.
Good for you.
The Nason guy told me how to hotwire it. Just pull the computer out and everything runs. I mean, only it was that easy.
Public Works taking care of the ash.
Yep. And thank you guys for doing it too. But Evan came in the other day, and all of our guys went over it. And the monthly servicing on it is a little extensive, all the grease fittings and everything else that they do. But they'll do the weekly and the monthly cleanups, and we're keeping an eye on it. But the concern was the pellets have been in there so long that they might have started to deteriorate, but they're still hard, they're not dusting up, and it hasn't kicked out once since we started it, so it's nice to have it running finally.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it runs a little bit more efficiently. Some of the issues before, I think there were some cold winters, the main circulator pumps on the larger 4-inch mains one wasn't working and they actually weren't turning on. So it was kind of convection heating to get up to the third floor, which is why Nancy was cold for so long. So once we figured that out, the system works. Is there anything in the municipal complex? That one was a little easier. Because not much was changing from what we had before. We have all the numbers from this year, but they were built and budgeted within the individual departments. We are still heating the 22 Pleasant Street on propane, but it's incredibly efficient. And we're really paying nothing to keep that heated. We still have one more year on our First Light internet contract. We've been in a 3-year contract with First Light. It's about $12,000 a year for internet for just this building, pretty much. When we broke it out, allocated expenses, internet and phone alone cost us $690 per employee who essentially has a computer and a telephone, and it's pretty pricey. But we've been stuck in a contract. I worked last summer with Time Warner to try and quote out what we could do if we swapped back. Savings would have been there, but within the contract, they couldn't offer us anything to help us buy out our existing contract, so we've been kind of waiting out that expense. But our speeds in this building, and I'm sure that some of it has to do with the wiring in the walls. When it comes to our speed, especially in the fire department, it's incredibly slow internet. I think a lot of that has to do with our internal wiring. But even with what we could do with cable, if we swap back, would be potentially, I want to price it out, last year was about a $6,000 a year saving on internet for comparable speeds, because we don't have a ton of usage when it comes to upload and download volume that we run. Most of what we're looking to with our changes within the software that finance and the clerks use are going to go to more remote work, so it'll be a little bit more internet usage if they host all of our accounts remotely instead of us hosting them ourselves. But even that usage can handle a commercial grade Time Warner account versus a $10,000 a year internet and phone bill.
Regarding the 22 Pleasant Street property, are we close to selling property, or is that something that's just ongoing, it's being negotiated, or with a buyer? Or I'm just trying to get an idea of how close we are to.
The council dropped the price 2 months ago. It's still outside of kind of real estate season. There's been no real tire kickers, or a little bit before. Really before we listed it, but as part of a larger development. But currently, realtor has gotten no calls on it. It's a pretty specific piece of property. And it's a postage stamp. It comes with maybe 4 parking spots that are in the back against that parking ride piece of property. It's going to take the right buyer, I think, to find it. So I'm hopeful that this spring, people start kicking around and we can get some more development. There's been more kind of new construction. It is an incredibly efficient building, and I'm hopeful that someone actually does want it, because it would be nice. That building is worth $12,000 a year in property taxes once we get it into private hands, so that would always be nice as well. But really, we got it listed late in the year, coming into the fall, and I'm hopeful that this spring we'll get some actual bites at it.
I just wanted to see if there was anything imminent. Okay. Thank you.
And we are still regularly budgeted for the $40,000 a year in debt service on it, but as soon as it sells, that payment goes away.
Okay.
Because those funds will have to clear that debt. So as long as we can sell it for what we have in it, we'll clear the rest of that loan, and that'll save us $40,000 a year in debt service on that building.
That would be good.
On the other hand, you say there's a committee put together that's looking at developing a municipal complex. Has that committee just negated to look at as a possible place to move?
The committee hasn't started yet. We're gonna start more towards August. If it's still there, I would assume it could be on the table. The council formed that committee, really it's, what we're envisioning is a needs-based assessment. You know, something that can be a little bit more nimble, has more community members, and that we can actually sit down by department, we can tour the fire department, tour Public Works, and see what it really looks like when you pull all the trucks in, how little space there is, and start looking at what optimal square footage would be for Public Works, optimal, number of bays, what type of bays would be a little bit more effective. Everybody's raving about pull-through bays for fire department, which I appreciate, but it's gonna be that kind of balance. I wanna at least kind of know what the departments need for square footage and access, and then potentially, that's what the committee's tasked with first, is to get a full needs-based assessment of what our operations really require to operate the way they need to. We've had a recent kind of inspection from DOL, and just anecdotally, we have our biggest fire truck doesn't have the required amount of clearance around it because the bay's not big enough, without taking out load-bearing walls. They've been gracious with us, and it's not really a problem, but it's again, not just a lot of ill-advised, not having bays big enough for our vehicles, or having things crammed too close together just to keep them out of the weather. And part of that would be kind of reassessing, what it is are we doing, what equipment do we have, or I think do we need it, can we do something different, approach as well. But the committee's at least focused more on the needs-based assessment, as opposed to roughly placing it yet. They would go back into the council's hand and whether or not they would, either take the needs-based assessment and have a professional engineer kind of come up with something, or if they'd be looking at other alternatives like reusing that building. Does that make sense?
Somewhat.
Anything in municipal yet? Jump to town clerk. So we've had some staffing changes within the town clerk office. And what we had done in the previous budget, we had the safety compliance officer stipend position that we had removed. We had staff on hand that was taking that on and being able to do that work, or at least step into it. It was something that was traditionally done as a part-time stipend add-on to the code enforcement office. But we needed to find, we moved code enforcement to a full-time position to keep up with the workload between code enforcement, building inspector, and health officer. That one person holds all those titles already. Safety compliance officer was something additional that they were up front, that we didn't have the ability and the bandwidth to do everything. So it moved it to a position. We don't have that person in place, and we don't have that kind of opportunity with the shedding of the recreation coordinator position. The clerks have also opted to pick up some of that extra work that Ashley was doing in her role as well. So I want to say on the next tab, we will be looking to kind of reestablish a separate safety compliance officer the way we had it before. But in the meantime, we have the two full-time clerks, and the only real reduction in that department is the removal of allocated expenses.
So there is no recreation coordinator. Who, is there a person or entity that is processing the financial requests on behalf of the recreation committee? I'm just trying to get at how that mechanism works now.
So we had met with them. We had a recreation coordinator who actually moved on to another position, and she found full-time employment somewhere else. At that time, the recreation committee had asked not to fill that position again. So what they've done is they've taken it on. We're working through a new process now where Recreation Committee members are running their own QuickBooks. We have access to it, so that it saves us.
We're actually writing the checks and making the deposits here,
Okay.
but they have access to the finance so that they can see themselves and run their own reports out of the QuickBooks system. They're able to bill for their signs and stuff like that,
So everyone's on the same page with all of this?
so everybody's on the same page with all of this. Presently, I'm working on the writing of the checks and doing the deposits, but eventually Julie is looking to take that on. I'm just trying to get it all set up since we changed systems, and once I've got it, then if Julie has time. She's a little busy right now.
So if they go to the hardware store to buy something, anybody from the rec committee can do that? Or how does, remember that was a problem?
They are still supposed to be working with purchase orders. They need to get approval of their committee, and they're supposed to be calling with a purchase order and getting a purchase order for purchases.
If they need something on a Saturday that costs $25, that's the problem still?
I'm a little bit flexible with that. So if they're calling me and telling me they needed something and they've already picked it up, it was a $25 item, they call me and say they immediately needed an ATV and they purchased one over the weekend, that's gonna be a problem.
Without a department head to authorize at the department head level, what we do have is either myself, Lisa, or Julie have the ability to approve rec expenses so that we can do it quicker. So if one of us isn't here, that there is always someone here during business hours that can approve those.
Oh, good.
And it seems to be good. We haven't heard much from them other than processing. I think them having the ability to pull their own reports, be a little bit more flexible, they can do their budgets in software that's more intuitive than the software that we use on the municipal side, but still, Lisa has access to their QuickBooks so she can pull the reports that she needs to reconcile all the accounting when we need it done, and it kind of got the best of both worlds.
Good.
What we don't have from the rec coordinator position is someone doing the programming. We're taking on the financing side of it, and they're really taking on all of the scheduling, programming, and other programs like the air crew, active and retirement crews. Some of the members are still meeting here, but we don't have staff kind of working with them or
So
promoting.
you're providing the fiscal oversight and the management
Yep.
as far on the financial side?
Yep. Minor CIP, again, we're not doing a lot of minor CIP purchases. And in the major CIP, I don't think we made any changes. As a refresher, for the major CIPs for departments, you go to the folded pages in the back. Those will be our 7-year capital improvement side of it for every department. The only thing we have for the town clerk is the election equipment. I think they're still changing and updating what the potential impact of the new equipment may be. We may be able to lease it, so we may have flexibility there that we won't have to go out and buy new election equipment, new voting machines essentially. So we'll have more flexibility there. We're doing a 1-year lease now. Last year when we budgeted, we were being told that there was a potential that the state was entertaining a new contract which would require us to shift companies for the machines that we have. They didn't do that. They kept the same company, so we're good for another year. And we're on the 1-year lease for what we have now.
You're not connected to the internet.
But they still send us a flash drive that the state programs for us every year.
Putin's not gonna be getting into our voting system.
Not unless he comes through a thumb drive. Anything else you want? You good? Any questions on that one? You guys can jump in too. Next one would be administration. Again, the only real changes there are the pulling out of the allocated expenses.
Who does payroll service?
Bangor payroll is our payroll service.
And I'm going to jump to the admin CIP real quick. So this year for the admin CIP, the only thing we're looking for, the capital improvement plan would be 30,000 in. It's another 20,000 towards our revaluation. That will put us over 100,000 of the revaluation. Again, that's with the assessor to hopefully come around and reevaluate all the properties for value appreciation. And then 10 in building reserve, which is really what we've been using to maintain the buildings. This building, this fiscal year, I think we've put maybe $6,000 into it between sprinkler repairs, furnace circulators, and a new toilet. So the toilet on this floor does work now. We were putting it off because we didn't think we were going to be here, but we had to fix it. Yeah, and you can still see we're carrying the balance on some of the others. And I don't think I had this last year. For the CIPs, we wanted to spend more time, and we haven't gotten to it before this budget year on the CIP. So as we go through them, what we're able to do is go to our insurance company and get the full list of all of the assets that we have listed. So you'll notice it more on PD and especially fire and public works. You'll see a full breakout of all of the large ticket assets that we pay to insure, all of our vehicles, handheld equipment. So really to get a better idea of what it is we're holding on to and start figuring out, what an actual maintenance routine looks like for these assets. We're still working on developing the more comprehensive CIP because traditionally they've been aggregated, which has its benefits. We have a vehicle reserve for the police department now instead of CIPing for individual cruiser replacements per se. So we're still leading into that process, and that's more of a ongoing endeavor. Are we good on admin? Any questions? Anecdotes? Next would be the safety compliance officer. This was something that we had traditionally. So full kind of step back. We used to have it a couple of transfer station managers ago. The transfer station manager was also the safety compliance officer. It is kind of a very important role that really spends a lot more time making sure all of our policies, procedures, we have annual trainings that all staff have to have every year. And they've been really in charge of that, as well as keeping our Department of Labor records and books kind of up to date and in place. I've been serving in that role in the interim. When we lost our safety compliance officer, don't have the opportunity. If you can remember last year, and I want to say last budget cycle, we had the conversation as well, because we're still looking to hire a part-time transfer station manager. Hiring part-time managers is not always easy to find people interested in part-time work that still has the requirements of supervisory positions. We asked probably 2 years ago now to consider making transfer station manager a full-time position and having that person be the compliance officer. We are not looking or requesting to do that now. We do have, Catherine was filling that role when she was a manager, a few managers ago for the transfer station. She still has full-time work somewhere else. So I think we're lucky to have her on the weekends the way we do. I've also been in ongoing talks kind of within the fire department as to finding someone within their roles that could really step up and fill the role that we need for a safety compliance officer. And what we're looking at is to find someone who's more of a train-the-trainer scenario that can come in and do our staff, public works specifically as well. They all need to be first aid certified every year. As well as our firefighters would benefit from it, bloodborne pathogens training, but someone who can potentially take those trainings to be a trainer, and then we're having our staff do it instead of paying for all of these classes that we have to send these people to maintain the certifications that they do have to have. Still trying to find people interested, but until we can kind of get approval, because right now it's not in our current budget, trying to line people up for the new fiscal year, when we can have a stipend position and reinstitute a safety compliance officer and get them back to work for their 8 hours a week.
8 hours a week?
Yep.
Wow.
You find people that are willing to do that?
I'm really hoping some of our fire department have some of the training required. Would also help to have someone more ingrained within the fire department, doing some of the DOL paperwork and keeping up on they have a lot more record keeping because of the amount of people that they have. They have a lot more, all of the volunteers have to have their annual checks, training, safety stuff. The town staff is a little easier from a safety compliance management because we're always here and there's less of us than there are firefighters. We are outnumbered.
Have you asked any of the firefighters?
Yes.
Any response? No?
I'm working on them. It still pays less than they make in their full-time job. Our firefighters, even when they show up to a call, are making $12 an hour, $12.50 maybe an hour. Kind of hard for someone to leave a $25 an hour job for. I get it. I can appreciate that side of it. So I'm trying to find people who are still, willing to give up their nights and weekends to do some of the work. But still entertaining that we may have to contract out, like we contract out for general assistance. That we're contracting with someone who contracts with other towns as well, so those opportunities are still out there. Any questions on that one? Utilities is pretty straightforward.
Why the decrease in repairs? Is there just some things that don't need to be done this time around? Or?
No, as you recall, last year we allocated expenses that normally had been within the municipal complex budget, and the elevator servicing and licensing ended up in utilities, and this year we moved that back into the municipal complex budget.
Okay.
I have a question. What does Lewiston Auburn water pollution have to do with us?
We send our septic, we have a septic system. I bet that's gonna double next year.
Potential.
I don't know, it says year 2 of a 3-year agreement.
Yeah.
Can they double it while we're still in the agreement?
Not now, but when the contract expires, I bet it goes way up. It just a feeling.
What is our current cost for street lamps and per lamp?
Oh. I've don't have the total number, but I can break it out. There's been a lot of
I think we had it at one time.
There's been a lot of communities working on the LED conversion. Paris, Norway, I want to say they kind of came together to do it themselves, where they kind of bought out the lamps, rent the space. And other towns in the area, Poland being one, I believe. Yeah. Where CMP is going to do the LED conversions for the streetlights anyway eventually. And we're kind of in a target area for them to get to them sooner rather than later. So instead of us spending the money to pay for it, to do it ourselves, to lease the poles, and with everything else going on, we weren't looking to jump on actually going out to convert all of ours.
There's a lot involved in that, because if you go to those LEDs, you actually purchase the pole.
Correct.
If there's an accident, the town is responsible for replacing that pole.
And the
Not
goosenecks as
CMP.
well, yeah. And that's where I didn't see the benefit, not knowing that, I mean, if within 5 years they're gonna convert them for us, putting that money up front, for the short-term savings on electric right now.
But you'd be curious to see how many lamps we do have.
Actually, if you look at utilities budget, underneath it says inventory, 42 at 70 watt, 41 at 100 watt, and 12 at 250 watt.
Yeah, plus 100.
Probably all the street designations.
That would include the ones in the public parking lot, right?
Yeah, that would.
The fancy ones. Those would be the lower watt.
Yeah, those would be in there too.
In the water department, we actually rent the hydrants from the water department.
Yep. We do get 21,000 a year kind of in admin overhead kickback from the water department to us to cover essentially the work that Lisa and I do for the water department. So there's some of an offset.
And I do believe that they are required by law to have a certain percentage of their revenues be from municipal stuff. I don't know if that's why hydrant rental, but Michelle or Steve could tell you more what the regulation is on that.
Every town and city does it. Rent the hydrant. I've worked it all on water. And then they rent the hydrant so much. I don't know how the prices compare to mechanicals and, well, Auburn shows more because they would be the one that.
You go quite a ways to go all the way in the pole.
And Poland pays the water department for all of those hydrants as well.
Hopefully that's a maintenance budget that they use to put aside for when they need stuff done. They can do, just like the sewer department would do.
Code enforcement, there's, the only change again is the removal of allocated expenses.
Under contracted services, is $2,000 for legal services sufficient? I noticed that in some of your other legal services, the amount was $4,000. I'm just wanted to see if there's any reason for the difference.
There'd be a little bit less of a usage, I think, directly from a kind of a code enforcement planning board point of view, where within the councils and board budget, that would include planning board, but as well as any appeals board and the council. So there'd be kind of more end users for that. Again, it's not something that gets used a lot. But in scenarios that we do have either policy reviews, again today, granted we're using free legal, but having input on some of these newer developments coming, potential solar farms, and trying to figure out what we can do within some of these newer developments. Them being able, I think, to get kind of independent advice helps. Because right now we're all kind of siphoning off from the same trough. This kind of at least budgets it and allocates it itself. And that's something that's kind of pre-planning board work before code enforcement gets to gets a package to the planning board to really consider something like that. They have the ability themselves to pull in outside legal counsel, or, you know, would it be acceptable or viable to have this type of clause added in an approval for some of these megawatt solar installations type deal.
I just wanted to make sure that, you know, the amount was sufficient to cover in the event. Some things, sometimes the decision can get very contentious.
Right.
And I just wanted to make sure we have sufficient funds so we're not putting that into the red.
And that's kind of the hard part, budgeting, especially with legal expenses, because, I mean, you can have off years and you can have years where you never touch it.
Sure.
So.
Okay.
So lastly, for tonight, Nancy, do you want to speak for yours? And I have your calculation sheet.
okay,
so you at least
good,
have-
because I brought
you
it.
explain it better than I do.
Thank you.
I think my budget has really stayed pretty steady since I've been there. 4 years,
I can see
almost 5. Thank you. And I used, this, what you're seeing here is the value of the library services to the town, based on the number of patrons, the number of adult books borrowed. You can see the whole line of things. And the annual, but what's my, I didn't get a final.
Your annual is 34.4.
34,400, and out of that, with all the things that Michelle and I get done, the value to the Mechanic Falls residents is $163,788. No, I mean, the average cost of an adult hardcover book is about, it's between $28 and $30 a piece. If my books circulate 15 times, that's quite a bit of money saved by the average person in the town. I don't have a lot of people from out of town. I charge $10 a year for an out-of-town card. But most of them, Poland has their own library and they're open a lot more than I am. Most of them come in from Minot because it's more convenient for them to come this direction than to go into Auburn. Even though the town of Minot pays for Lewiston and Auburn, they pay the fee that the people would have to pay. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for me, but.
The big savings, she had a little bit of increase on the newer book purchases because price
Yeah.
going up. Again, the reduction in her budget is from removing allocated expenses. And since she wasn't getting any of the heat anyway, I felt
No.
that.
You took that out. It was a little chilly, but we made it.
We fixed it.
We did, we fixed it. So. Any other questions for me?
Nancy, you're doing a lot of conversion now to more digital books than we are.
I'm not. I actually, surprisingly, the downloaded books, I felt the number was pretty low through the state. I don't know The only thing that I find when I go to use it, it's frustrating because if you want a new book, it takes you have a long wait. And, sometimes it's upwards of 6 months. But the state is limited in the number of copies they can purchase. So,
I didn't know if the trend was libraries were going more to that.
I don't, not that I see.
We're getting from some other communities, it's much more of the public access computers.
Yeah.
And that's becoming really the bigger draw that libraries are still seeing, because even other libraries have entertained, renting Kindles and having people check out a Kindle instead. But the usage on people coming to check their email and do job apps seems to be.
Yeah. I had more people in today, using the computers and just, coming in to drop off books and inquire about a lot of different things than I let books out. But, that's usually it about evens out, but, it just really depends on the day. So, but I did have quite a few people. I have one lady who comes in every, 3 days a week and does her work, because she does not have internet access at home. And she lives in Minot, works in Auburn, but she comes here because Auburn, when she goes there, limits her to a half an hour. And she said, sometimes I can't finish my work in a half an hour. So here, I don't limit anybody, as long as no one's waiting for the computers. I have 4. As long as no one's waiting for it, she can be on there as long as she needs to be.
She's got the 4 booths set up, and if you jump to
Yeah, I have a laptop.
her CIP, there is 300 from this budget proposal going in towards her computer CIP. She's carrying a $1,500 balance to keep those
Right.
computers serviced and updated. Did some extra work on them this year?
I did. I put some solid state drives in them. They run a lot faster. They, the kids love it because they can get on their games and so I figure that keeps them busy. So,
Good job, Nancy.
thank you. Well, I enjoy it, so I guess that counts. So no more questions, no more issues, nobody's calling up complaining about that librarian. And cards are free, so you can come in and get one anytime.
I have one.
You've got one, there you go.
So that's kind of what we had slated for today. In the back side of your binder is the overall budget schedule. So that is there.
Well. I asked Brian if he has one.
So we will meet again in a couple of weeks, and we will pull together a new year-to-date too. Not much is really gonna change between last week and 2 weeks from now when it comes to the year-to-date numbers, but gives you kind of more of an accurate what this year looks like. We will I'll put on the agenda for the next one for Budget Committee to do their annual chair announcements of an election, and we will potentially have 2 new members. And if you 2 are available for the council meeting on the 2nd, that'd be fantastic. And that's kind of all I wrote.
Okay, so we close.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I second that motion.
All in favor?